Hello again and welcome to Finding Sanctuary. This is a series of discussions between Buddhist nuns about the Therīgāthā, which are poems composed by fully enlightened nuns at the time of the Buddha, about 2,500 years ago. I am Ayya Vimalanyani, and with me today is Ayya Soma. Ayya Soma, thank you so much for coming, and we're so happy to have you today.
Thank you, Venerable. Thank you for having me today and for organizing this beautiful project. I'm very honored to have been included with all the other Venerables.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So I will briefly introduce you to the audience. Ayya Soma is an Italian Buddhist female monk and the co-abbot of Empty Cloud Monastery in New Jersey, which is, I think, a relatively new monastery for monks of all genders. And she's also the co-founder of Buddhist Insights, a non-profit organization connecting people with monastics. And they have also a very active YouTube channel with live streams every week. So if you're interested, I'll leave links to both of these projects in the description box and you can check it out later. And she has learned the Dhamma through the perspective of monks of all different traditions. And she incorporates aspects from all of them in her own practice. Her spiritual path is inspired by the social engagement of Venerable Paññāvati Bhikkhuni, by the knowledge and wisdom of Venerable Robina Courtin, and by the compassion of Khenmo Drolma. Such a beautiful biography that you have there, very inspiring, and I'm really very happy that you're here today.
Thank you, Venerable.
So I heard, Ayya, that you're also a translator, and you're translating the Therīgāthā into English and Italian. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that project and why you chose the Therīgāthā as the scripture that you want to translate.
Yes, so I'm very young translator, so I'm still in the process of honing my skills with the Pali language. But when I was in Italy, when I was young, we had to study Latin, ancient Greek, all of those, well, what I perceived as dead languages and very useless languages back then. And actually, they weren't terribly useful most of my life until entering the path and encountering Pali, which is actually very similar in grammar and in style with both ancient Greek and Latin. So it's been, so I started just also here, Bhante Sudaso, my preceptor and teacher, he's a very good translator. So we've been doing some Pali classes at the monastery, and that kind of got me very interested in really understanding what the Buddha said with his own words. And there's so many nuances of the language that sometimes get lost in translation, and they help us when we start working with them. They help us, or at least they help me better fully understand the Dhamma. So we did our first winter retreat here at Empty Cloud Monastery, and I decided to pick a translating project since it was going to be a very long, quiet time. And yeah, so I picked the Therīgāthā mainly because I thought I was going to finish it in 2 months. I thought this is short enough to, that I can do it in this amount of time. But actually, I almost finished it. I didn't finish it entirely, but it was interesting because it gave me the opportunity to once again look at the nuances of the texts and the nuances also of my experience as a bhikkhuni and the experience of just women having a female body and how it's perceived, what are the expectations on this body, and how is this in relation to awakening? What is the difference between sex and gender, and how it's also shifted or not shifted at all, actually, in the 2,500 years. So yeah, it's been a beautiful journey. I'm still in the process of it. I'm almost done, but yeah, it's probably, how do you say, it will be a never-ending process in the way that as the path keeps moving forward. so my understanding of the suttas, or of the words of the first liberated women of the past, will come into being.
Such a beautiful project. And do you know, is this the first time that the Therīgāthā are being translated into Italian?
Yes, that's also another reason why I picked the Therīgāthā, because well, there are very few translations in Italian, and they're mostly actually translated from English. So pre-existing English texts that just are translated in Italian rather than from the Pali original. So in general, I have to say, I realize the good karma that I have to speak English and to have actually the access to translations like Venerable Paññāvati's translations or Venerable Sujato's translations. Right now, we are so lucky in terms of the amount of Dhamma that is available and accessible in a language that is understandable. And in Italian, it's very clunky, the sort of translations that are present. And sometimes they have very much of a Christian jargon to it. So the sort of translators from English were not Buddhist, they were not practitioners. So then obviously the Catholic religion is the sort of most familiar to the people who did this job. So I thought that the Therīgāthā would be a great way to introduce the Dhamma in an inspiring way, but also in a concise way, so that anyone who's interested can have access to a bit of a taste of Dhamma and then go, oh, well, I want to explore the whole ocean, so to speak.
Very good. Yes. I can relate very well because I'm a translator myself. Yes, I actually translate ancient from ancient Chinese, the early Buddhist texts from the Chinese northern tradition, and into English. I don't translate into German because it's too unpleasant for me. As you said, the language sounds very clunky and there's not really an established vocabulary there. But yeah, the translations that I'm doing have never been translated before. So I know how challenging it can be to translate, and you have this pressure, you don't want to misrepresent the original text. So you feel a little apprehensive sometimes when you can't really pick the right word, or you can't really grasp the proper phrasing or something. So, yeah.
That's wonderful. I very much look forward to reading your work. Thank you for undertaking it. We need a lot more Dhamma around. So sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Okay, then shall we dive into your poem, your first poem?
Sure. Okay.
I will share my screen again. And as a special treat today, Ayya Soma will share with us her translation that she made herself. So on my screen, you will see Bhante Sujato's translation, and Ayya Soma will read out her own, which might be slightly different. We will see. So Ayya Soma, if you're ready, please go ahead.
All right. This is the Mutta Theri poem. I am well released and free, freed from the three deceits of the mortar and the pestle, and the deceitful husband. I am free from birth and death, uprooted is craving for any state of existence.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. It sounds very beautiful, very, very poetic, I think. I think it's a very, very powerful poem. I like it very much because it's such a celebration of enlightenment. And you can really feel how she's, if she was, slumped down and she's bent over and finally she's free and she can stand up tall and take a breath and lay down the burden. So it's a very, very beautiful poem. And maybe we can start by you telling us why you chose this poem.
Yeah, well, it's, as you said, it's a beautiful, very short, but so rich of meaning, so relatable in so many ways. So as I was translating actually this poem, the I encountered the word kujehi, so kuja, that I think Venerable Sujato translated as bent.
Humpbacked. Humpbacked,
yeah. Mm-hmm. But then he also, I believe, had in the following sentence, he was, I've been bent by
yes, bent over. Yes, bent over. Mm.
Yeah, so there's this wordplay that is actually very difficult to catch in translation, with the word kuja that is repeated multiple times throughout the poem. And it has both the connotation of humpbacked and also the connotation of something that is bent, but also something that crushes, which is how we see the mortar and pestle, so crushes grains and make flour. And also then there is a connotation of oppression and of deceitfulness. So the reason why I picked deceits for each one of these, the three deceits, so the mortar, the pestle, and the husband, was because of how, out of all of these sort of nuances, it kind of really spoke to me in terms of the deceitfulness of samsara and the ideas that are projected on women. So historically, perhaps today there's in certain Western countries less of an emphasis on the mortar, on the pestle, so to speak, so less being in the kitchen, but it's a very recent, actually, development. Up until definitely my mother's generation, there is very much the idea that the woman belongs to the kitchen, and that the biggest aspiration that a woman should have is to be the caretaker of her husband and her children. And in one way, we kind of buy into, or we have bought into having this female body for thousands and thousands of years in this sort of patriarchal way of telling women what their role in society was. And there is the idea that we like this, that we want this, that we're choosing this for ourselves, but in reality, actually, it's a non-choice. In reality, it's something that is imposed, something that bends us over. And that is crushing us. And so it's so beautiful how from the first, from the inception of the poem, Mutta Theri says how she's released from all of these things that have been imposed on her, that are not actually freeing. They don't conduce to happiness, but quite the opposite. They are oppressive. But they're also deceitful, because there is a point where someone will believe that actually having a husband, which can be today perhaps translated in a relationship, having a beautiful, like, sort of Disney movie kind of relationship, or perhaps it's not the mortar and the pestle, but it can be a career. Whatever it is that we think samsara offers that will make us happy is in reality deceitful.
Yes, and also with the mortar and the pestle, that imagery, some people say this is obviously a sexual imagery also, and it also alludes to, women back then, but also even nowadays in lots of countries, were forced into arranged marriages, and then, they had to be sexually available to their husband, and obviously in this case, the husband wasn't very attractive or wasn't very faithful to her, maybe, as you said, if he's deceitful. So it must have felt very violating for that woman to be forced into like a sexual relationship with that kind of person. And I feel like even, just from the worldly point of view, even if you don't attain arahantship, if you just be able to enter into monastic life, even that is such a liberation for women at that time. Because they were like in these like arranged marriages. It was difficult to get divorced. I think it was really difficult to live alone as a woman in the Buddha's time, especially for like lower class women. For the higher class women, actually, there are quite a number of instances in the sutras where women are the heads of households, where women are esteemed teachers. and are like strong and independent women. But for the lower class women, it seems that they were very much under let's say the guidance or whatever of a man, under the control of a man. So even just, you know, having a way out of this kind of abusive relationship and being able to experience just the freedom of monastic life, even if you don't attain arahantship, just, you know, being able to have agency over your life and going where you want, practicing where you want, and having a perspective in life, not being confined to household chores and looking after your husband and, you know, popping out children as much as you can. Even having a perspective that there is a higher goal and that there's something else available for women, and that enlightenment is theoretically possible for women, even that must have felt so liberating. And of course, then if you walk the path and actually attain full freedom, then, you know, then there's really the overwhelming joy that we can feel, the celebration that we can feel in this poem, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it is, in fact, like the fourth messenger fundamentally, so that there is an alternative to this. And it's so incredible how, you know, actually this is one of the things that really strengthens my faith in the Buddha, how when one starts reading the actually history of women, which is a fairly recent endeavor that has been undertaken by lots of women worldwide to actually you know, point us in the direction of what is the female perspective on these last 3,000, 4,000 years, rather than what we think is history, like this, you know, objective history, but in reality is filtered through a male perspective.
Yeah.
And you see how in all these years, there was always the sort of absolute pretty much anyone was not even questioning the inferiority of women, or was not even questioning the fact that a woman had to have a particular role, a submissive role within a particular society. And so for the majority of female-bodied people, there was no kind of way out. And it was only the Buddha that I'm aware of that actually not only questioned this, not only questioned the status quo, but pretty much said how gender or sex, both are social constructs. Well, gender is a social construct, and you know, sex is just, you know, physical body part that is no different than having different colored eyes. Like, it's not something that is relevant in the path towards awakening, and hence created this option for women to, as you said, very skillfully, go forth in so many ways and find freedom. So both, of course, in the finding the ultimate freedom of the spiritual life, but also having just taking a break from the patriarchy. And I have to say that it's also relatable today. We tend to think that, you know, 2,500 years women had it so much worse than today, but actually it's not really quite the case. It's pretty bad these days as well. It's just that we have had the opportunity in the past decades, I realized, to have some little bubbles where we can pretend that we are, you know, free women, whatever that means in a sort of Western concept of freedom, and not have to worry about certain decisions. But in reality, we're in this constant state of oppression too. And it just manifests in a different form. So for me, actually, Buddhism has represented, this form is representing, you know, a way out of this claustrophobic ideal of what are we supposed to do in this sort of in this world, and especially as we grow older as women, there is this idea that you are supposed to want to have children, or you're supposed to want to get married and have a particular life. I never, as a layperson, had the aspiration of having children, and it was never a problem for me. But it was a problem. It started becoming a problem for other people as time went by, which was actually a very bizarre state of being, because at a certain point I remember thinking, why don't I want to have children?
Yes, and you start to question your own choices and your own lifestyle preferences, and you constantly get projected on by other people. And yeah, I feel like, especially as women, these kind of old-fashioned projections are still very strong.
Yeah. It's very common to also hear, I know some people that I asked, oh, why did you have your second child or third child? And they were like, oh, just because my husband wanted me to have the second and third child. And I was shocked, really shocked, because we're talking about, women living in New York City that work, say, in the financial district. So actually have a full-on career. So very independent. That's why I'm saying perhaps we can have this delusion that someone like that is very different from the experience of Venerable Mutta, who is in 2,500 years ago in India. But it's not that terribly different in the way that it's still a big deceit. Like, oh yeah, I want to make him happy fundamentally. But actually the person is not happy to have the child to begin with. I mean, they're taking on motherhood in a very different way than it were for someone who actually decided it. And it can be actually a beautiful experience. So I'm not saying that motherhood is not something to aspire to as a lay person, as a lay woman. But it's very different deciding to do something from being forced to decide to do something. And having that pressure from the outside world, whether it's a relationship or other people. And and then it's this prison that perhaps has, a wireless connection and, fancy whatever apartment in the city in Manhattan. And so we have this delusion that it's radically different than 2,500 years ago. But I would say that it's a more polished, deceits, 3 deceits.
Exactly. Still a cage, but now a cage with the golden bars.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. I think this might be a good time to wrap up the video. If our viewers have any comments or questions, please leave them in the comments below. At the end of the Therīgāthā awareness week or fortnight, we'll have to see. When we have uploaded all the videos, we will have a live stream of all the nuns and we will answer all your questions. So please, anything that you want to ask, leave it in the comment section. The next episode will be uploaded tomorrow. And finally, I just want to say once again, Ayya Soma, thank you so much for joining us today. It was such a pleasure having you.
Thank you very much, Venerable. It's my pleasure.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.